Hello. So let us start checking the main lines, but for the next few lessons we are going to go through the variations where white postpones at least or playing d4. In some of those lines actually white never finally plays d4. So everything but the main Sicilians. And so let's start with e6, knight f3, e6. As I've mentioned already in my previous lesson, so you play e6, you have to play e6 if, for instance, you are planning to play Paulsen system, then e6 is obligatory. Okay, if you play in Taimanov, then you can also start with knight c6. So it depends very much on what sidelines after each of those moves you feel more comfortable with as black. After e6, maybe actually it gives the biggest amount of sidelines for white, which makes sense. But from other point of view, as you will see during this lesson, I don't think they are so dangerous. Quite a number of those sidelines are playable and dangerous in the sense that you should really be prepared. But if black is well prepared, black knows what he is doing, most of the lines are pretty harmless in my opinion. Maybe only this third c3, which we will consider at the end of this session. c3 is quite serious. Still, of course, it will not, stop you from playing e6 after knight f3. But anyway, here you need really to choose which system you want to play and to probably to make some more work to be sure that you are holding well after c3. Other lines, I think what I will give you today would be already enough for you to play it. Anyway, it's always useful to make a bit of more work on it on your own, check games and so on, but the directions and the main positions I'm going to tell you now. E6, okay, one by one, let's start. There is a certain idea to play bishop e2. Well, not a very big deal, obviously, rather an ambitious move, but it makes some sense. So knight c6 castle, so white still is, so to say, hesitating whether he wants to play c3, d4, or maybe d4. Depends on what black is doing. I believe knight f6 is most logical way of playing. Knight c3, and now black has a choice between simply moving to a Sicilian, but actually quite a good version for black, the main one with d6, or playing d5. After d5, white's idea is to take and then play d4. Maybe white can count on a small initiative here. I don't believe it's going to be anything special for white, but at least there is a chance to press a bit with white, even though if you are considering playing it with black, I think that checking it a bit more with engines will probably lead to a conclusion that black will actually manage to equalize here. But another very solid way of playing is d6. Now there is nothing else than d4 which can make sense. Takes, bishop e7, and actually we are moving here into a little bit different area, into the so-called Scheveningen system with bishop e2. Why Scheveningen? Because I think for the first time actually it was played in some European place. There was a tournament and somebody discovered that you can play Sicilian with d6, e6, and it's not that bad. Well, there were good times when you could discover still such things, and the place was Scheveningen. So since then, at least old school, we call it Scheveningen pawn structure. So here, actually there is a big difference, bishop e3 castle, because there is a huge theory in this position. Let's say if a6, a4 is played, castle f4, and Queen c7, king h1, rook e8, and a lot of games. Kasparov was playing it all his life. But things are not so easy for black. I mean, it's not 100% sure if black finally equalizes. So that's why this variation was played by many top players, including Anatoly Karpov, of course, and so on. But the point is that in this particular move order, actually, for white, it's very difficult to get this position. For instance, okay, if white plays a4, I suppose black is not, well, doesn't have to play a6, obviously. Yes. So, for instance, quite a typical way of playing for black is to take on d4 and play b6 or bishop d7, bishop c6. It's pretty solid for black, this kind of play. So a6 is definitely not necessary. Maybe also, by the way, e5 might be quite good here. And in case of knight b3, for instance, I guess bishop e6 should be also probably okay. So then white, in order to get this position, he's playing f4. And now it is anyway important. Of course, it's a little bit a different system, but well, to have a general knowledge is anyway useful for both colors. And here the important point is that e5 actually is very solid and very good move which equalizes, and that is already, you know, proven for many years that white is really suffering here, trying to find any idea how to play for advantage, because of course knight f5 here is not good, because you just take and d5, and it's only black who can be better. Also pretty harmless is taking on c6. Here knight c6, bc6, which leads to an equal position simply. Another attempt is knight b3, fe5 and knight b3. Knight b3 is, well, supposed to be main line, but also there were a lot of games of strong players in this position, and it's kind of sterilized. It's just nothing for white, because black is preparing d5, and even if not d5, still it's not clear if white has anything in this position, but actually d5 next equalizes for black. And then, so what is left is fe5, knight f5. So white is taking the bishop. And of course, if he manages, for instance, to play bishop c4, he can be better, but he's not in time. The simplest is g6, taken on d1, and knight d4. So forcing practically white to play bishop d3. And now different moves, king g7 or rook c8. I guess king g7 is also fine. This endgame is more or less equal and actually rather drawish, in fact. So that is why on bishop e2, yeah, I can advise you to play this d6 or d5, or analyze a bit d5 and trying to find a very clear way to equalize here, which is also pretty realistic, I would say. So all in all, bishop e2 is not a great weapon, but, you know, also as white, you can try, especially against players who are playing only Paulsen, for instance, a6 system. Maybe they can start to drift a bit in this other theoretical position of the Scheveningen system. Then what else? G3. G3 is quite a serious move. Next, let us consider G3 move. It's quite serious. It was even played by Magnus Carlsen in his World Championship match against Vishwanathan Anand in Sochi. I think that I made some work on this move, and I think I found a couple of quite solid ways for black to equalize. So I think that maybe the simplest is to play d5, the most straightforward and principle. But knight c6 is also fine. Well, only thing that white can transpose now, let's say after bishop g2, knight f6, knight c3. Of course, he can always play d3, but then it's just an equal position. So knight c3, and then finally d6, d4, and we get to this tabia, which I've discussed already earlier. Well, normal position. It's supposed to be pretty harmless for black, but still you need to know it. So that is a small minus of knight c6, but hopefully, I mean, it's part of your repertoire, this position, and then there is no problem. Otherwise, maybe white can try some tricky way of playing. Is d4, takes, and now the idea is that if knight f6, white wants to play bishop c2, and then to play c4 before playing knight c3, yeah, using this move further. And after castles knight c3, it seems that black is not in time here to attack the c4 pawn. And if white manages to settle his pieces, castles, b3, etc., he will have a certain plus, definitely. So, but here black can play d5, and that is very important. I think it is enough to equalize. So there are two ways of playing for white. If bishop g2, then de4 is fine. This endgame, okay, black has some weaknesses in the pawn structure, but the king on d1 and knight on e4 is, bishop on e4 is getting under attack. So next knight f6 coming, long castle with check, and black has enough dynamics to, I mean, not to worry too much about his prospects. I think the position is just equal. So another way of playing is d5, knight c3. And now maybe knight f6 already is the most accurate. And after e takes d5, actually computers even taken with the pawn on d5. And I think after bishop g2, playing bishop g4, and believe that the position is close to equal. But knight takes d5 is more solid, I would say. And it seems that, well, white can try to get maybe some small plus after bishop g2, but taking on c3, bishop d7, castle, bishop e7, rook b1, queen c8. Okay, white has a certain pressure on the queen side, but his pawn structure is spoiled, and all in all, I think black with a few accurate moves should be able to equalize here. But still, white has some tries after knight c6, so in my opinion, d5 is more principal. e5, e5. Now d4 probably has to be played, because in case of bishop g2, well, at minimum, black can simply transpose to the line which I'm going to show you, which is the fifth d4. But there is also a good move, queen e7 check. Now, okay, playing king f1 is quite risky, this position with the king on f1. I don't think white can count on any advantage here. And of course, in case of queen e2, also knight f6, and queens will be changed, and the position is basically just equal. So that's why d4 is a better move here. And now black can simply play just develop pieces like this, bishop e7, knight will go to c3. I think this position will appear on the board. And okay, under some circumstances, it can be a bit better for white, because, well, black will end up with isolated pawn, obviously, but he has very active play here, and it's quite difficult for white to actually manage blockade of this pawn and to get an advantage. For example, rook e1 is possible, maybe a move like h6, very typical move for this position, stopping bishop g5. Computer is pretty happy with black here. Or more principle is to try d takes e5. And now I think there are two ways for black to be okay. One is d4. Okay, if knight goes to e2, then bishop takes e5 will not, cause any problem for black. So knight a4, protecting the pawn. And now even this queen a5, b3, bishop takes e5, a little bit looking a bit strange, but okay, computers pretend that black is in time to equalize here. Maybe simpler is just to play bishop takes e5, bishop g5, bishop e6, followed by h6, and also maybe black can play d4 next. Well, at least according to the engines, this position is equal. Yeah, so white is not in time to attack the d5 pawn or to put the pressure on the black's position. I think this is a simple, solid, and healthy way of playing for black against g3. So probably enough to equalize quietly. Well, what else? There is a move further knight c3. As I understand, the only idea is to avoid Paulsen system, which is force a6 against d4 cd, knight d4, because in case of knight c6, white anyway has nothing better than playing d4. So if you are playing knight c6, then you shouldn't be bothered at all with knight c3. But if you are playing only Paulsen after e6, then the white's idea is to play a6 and now to play g3. So to move to transpose to those closed Sicilians with knight c3, but black had played a6 already, so it's a little bit better version for white. So definitely those systems with g6, bishop g7, knight c6, which were very solid and doing very well against second knight c3, now already not playable. But still you can just play b5, bishop g2, bishop b7, d3, protecting the pawn, d6, castle, knight f6. So this position is it's playable. I mean, white, it's also playable for white. So in case if for some reason you are concerned as white about the Paulsen, this is an interesting way of trying to avoid it. It's definitely playable. There are different plans here possible. For instance, you can try to play knight h4, f4, and then push pawns on the king side. But objectively, black is also okay. I don't think it gives an advantage. Just it's a little bit, as I explained already, a bit of better version of the closed Sicilians. So all in all, I mean, the move knight c3 only concerns the Paulsen players. Then b3. Yeah, it's an interesting sideline, quite serious, so you need to know what to do about it with black. But and actually there are some problems in some lines, but I think that knight c6, a6 is a very good setup against it. So let's see. b6 is actually very popular, even was played by quite some top players, for example Caruana. I'm not so sure it is the best way of playing, because white can play, for example, like this, takes, knight f6, f3, and it's not so easy for black still to equalize, because I have mentioned already that actually in those kind of Sicilians, bishop on b2, it very rarely has a chance to be developed on b2, but it's not so bad. I mean, then of course white is trying to play for long castle next, and even though probably it's finally okay for black, but it's not so harmless. So what else? d5 of course looks logical. Maybe it equalizes, but not so many people they want to play like this, because you can take bishop b5 check. So now this system is, I think this position should be a little better for white, again because bishop on b2 is quite good, and it will end up in positions with isolated pawn, and probably certain plus for white. But maybe knight c6 is actually okay. Castle, bishop d6, it's a bit risky. Bishop b2, knight f6, and if, let's say, white checks with a queen on e2 or rook on e1, then bishop e6. Okay, you have to consider all those ideas with knight g5. It's a bit, yeah, there is some risk, but if, of course, black will manage to finish his development, he will be fine. But there is not so much theory. I mean, not so many games played like this, but can be checked. It might equalize also. But my advice would be to play whether a6 first and knight c6, or knight c6, bishop b2, a6. There is a big theory, knight f6, e5, knight d5, which, by the way, maybe is also okay, but yeah, it's a little bit strange positions, and you need to analyze it quite seriously. I mean, it's not so easy for black. Then if black is playing d5 here, then bishop b5. This is quite an important move without taking on d5. For some reason it's more precise. And here, yeah, I think black is experiencing some problems. But I think a6 is good. a6 is, there were some recent games. For example, I remember a rapid game, Magnus Carlsen played it with white against Fedoseev, and actually Fedoseev got even better out of the opening. I think it's, in my opinion, it's probably the best setup for black, because now what black simply wants to play d5. So if d4, yeah, that is very important. ZD knight d4, and now queen f6. That is a very, very important move. Otherwise, white would probably have a certain plus. But after queen f6, a bit strange, of course, way of playing. But this spin is quite annoying for white. So, for example, bishop e2, bishop c5, c3, knight e7, and actually, as surprising as it sounds, but computers already given a small plus for black in this position. So d4 probably is not a good move, and then in order to stop d5, white is playing c4 quite often, then queen c7, and actually white is not really in time to get d4 in this position. For example, well, immediately d4 might lose material because the e4 pawn will be weak, so black develops very quickly. In case of g3, there is knight f6, and again, e5 is possible to sacrifice a pawn and to play for compensation, but I don't believe it will be really an advantage, just a compensation at best. So usually white is playing knight c3 here, knight f6 and g3. Yeah, because d4 takes bishop c5. Actually here black has a very nice development, and after knight c6, which is the best move according to the engines, dc6, now black's next move will be e5, and of course he will have no problem at all. So white usually plays g3 here, and now it's important knight d4. So finally black stops white from managing d4, and this type of position finally arises. Castle d6, d3, castle. I think it's just complicated equal position. For instance, one of the possible plan for white is, I don't think it's such a great idea probably to take on d4 and play knight e2, because black is playing e5 and the bishop on b2 is not a great piece. So black just wants to develop, to push b5 at some point. So for example, white can try to play knight e1, bishop d7, f4, b5. Complicated game. I don't think black has any problem here. So in my opinion, this is a very solid way for black to play against the b3 system, but actually b3 is quite a serious move. I remember I was also preparing myself just to have it as a weapon, maybe in rapid chess. So pay attention. For white players, you can definitely, b3 is definitely playable. And for people who are listening to this course and want to play it with blacks, my recommendation, at least, even though there are other ways, as I've explained it already, but I think this system is doing pretty well for black. So that is all about b3, and let's move to this c4. Actually, it was always considered to be completely harmless, but nowadays, and it's probably still, I would say, harmless, but it's a bit more complicated than was considered earlier, because after knight c6, there is one system is to play knight c3, knight f6, bishop e2. So white is, d4 will lead to a transposition and to the position we are going to consider just after. Bishop e2, now white wants to play d4 and castle. So black's best move, not the only move, but the best move is d5. And here there were lots of games, a big theory actually here, but not too dangerous. In case of cd, d5, knight d7, actually it leads just to equal position, pretty drawish position. After knight takes d5, for example, knight d5, and it ends in a kind of empty position, which would probably be a draw at the end. Main line is ed, d4, and here black has a couple of ways to equalize. One is bishop e6, and now the main line goes like this: castle, dc, bishop e3. So white is trying c takes d4, knight takes d4. White is trying to use his development advantage to get something out of the opening, but probably one of the quite good ways here is takes queen a5. This is what, by the way, Alexander Grishuk played against me in classical chess in Kazan 2011 candidate matches, and even though finally I was better, but I think out of the opening he managed to equalize. So, but to me, just to make it simple, I think also c takes d4 is good enough. Knight takes d4, d takes c4, the most straightforward way of playing. Knight takes c6 and exchanging the queens, bc, bishop takes c4, and okay, there were quite many games in this position. Well, because of course, pawn structure, white keeps some, well, very minor, minimal advantage, but, it's not really serious. So black can play bishop b4 check, for example, bishop d2, and exchanging bishops, and there were quite some games, okay, mostly ending in a draw. Also, another quite a good move is, in my opinion, bishop c5, with the idea, in case of bishop e3, to play bishop b6, just to keep... Well, it's really very little for white. I mean, actually, it should end in a draw. So this is a solid, simple way, bishop e6. You need to study a bit more, but also there is no problem really for black here. But then this d4 line, okay, immediately or after knight c3, knight f6. So this position was always considered to be totally harmless, because bishop b4 forces white to take on c6 with a knight. And now, okay, of course not dc, because this position taken on d8 and e5 is very unpleasant for black. I mean, whether this endgame, whether knight e4, very important that white has a3 move. With the idea, in case of bishop a5, he can play b4. Now knight takes e3, ba, and the knight is in danger and white is better here, so dc6 is not recommended. But after bc6, now e5 doesn't work, after knight e4 black is just better. But white can play bishop d3. It looks very harmless, actually, looks completely harmless, but it's, recently became rather popular, and many strong players started to play like this. So black has to be accurate. e5 must be played, castle, castle. Now, okay, in case of queen c2, for example, black, I think the best is to play bishop c5, just to get to this diagonal, then followed by d6, h6. In general, strategically, black's position is fine. It's just that he needs to be, to know some accurate moves. For example, white sometimes plays h3 with the idea, if in case of d6, maybe knight a4. Knight a4, trying to push pawns, trying to attack the bishop on b4. Black can play d5, usually white takes ed, cd, but maybe white can fight for a small advantage in this structure. For example, I remember I won once a game in rapid chess against Garry Kasparov in this type of structure. Okay, it's of course nothing special, but yeah, under some circumstances, white can get some small plus. Another way of playing is just taking on c3 after h3, might be good enough, by the way, bc, d6, and f4, queen e7. And at least according to engines, black is capable of equalizing here. But again, another way is bishop c5. It's quite typical, logical, just in order to have bishop d4 after knight a4. And then black simply proceeds with d6, a5, h6, his, logical moves. But main line is bishop e3, actually trying to stop bishop c5. There was an important game, I believe, Mamedyarov-Grishuk. Grishuk took immediately on c3, because in case of d6, engines are given some strange move, queen b3, and pretend that white has some chances to be somewhat better in this position. Hard to understand why, but okay, who are we to have our own human opinion. But I mean, seriously, I suspect that this should be also playable for black. But maybe bishop takes c3 is more clear-cut way to equalize. B takes c3, d6, and now Mamedyarov played c5. After d5, e d5, knight takes d5. All this is the first line of computers, so probably both players, I'm pretty sure, they were still in the home preparation, and white had a bit of pressure, very little during, in this game, but finally black, I cannot say that black had any serious problems to equalize and to make a draw here. So this position, all in all, is is not that harmless as it was considered some years ago. So the engines, they brought a new life into this position. So it's black has to be careful, has to know what he is doing. So you can actually definitely have it as a reserve, maybe variation, part of your white's repertoire. But again, as you see that, well, it shouldn't represent any danger really for black player. And if you know that you have to play e5 here, and some small nuances like, yeah, the bishop c5 is one of the ideas here. In case of bishop e3, maybe you better take first on c3 and play d6. So I'm sure that black is capable of equalizing here as well. And finally, let's check c3. As I've mentioned already, it is the most serious sideline against e6. Definitely can be a part of your repertoire with white. You know, sometimes you don't want to enter some theoretical discussions and you want to play a game, but still to have a chance for a certain opening advantage. Then c3 is definitely a serious try. So now white wants to play d4, so there is just a choice of playing knight f6 or d5. Well, after knight f6, e5, knight d5, d4, then we move to the Sicilian with second c3. But black had played d6 already, so so equality is not so simple. I mean, because with a pawn on e7, usually black plays knight c6, and this position has very good chances to equalize with a knight on c6 instead of e6. Here, cd, it's not so simple. I mean, actually, it's playable for white, and black still has to be accurate and fight for equality in this position. I will give you a short overview. So the two major systems here, b6 or d6. d6 is supposed to be more solid, a bit more popular. b6 is very risky. Let's say the main line goes like this, knight c3, not the only move, by the way, but quite dangerous still. Takes, queen c7, just trying to get the bishop to d2, attacking the pawn on c3, bishop b7, bishop d3, d6, black cannot really do much, otherwise he needs to fight against this e5 pawn. Castles, knight d7, and this position has to be analyzed. I mean, you cannot really play it with black without serious analysis, because it is very dangerous. For example, there is a move knight g5 possible. Is an extremely sharp position, d5, queen h5, g6, queen h3, bishop e7, and let's say rook a1, and black's king is in the center. Very complicated position. Computer assesses it as more or less equal, but it's very, very complicated and requires, of course, if you want to play it with black, you need to analyze it further. And the main line is rook e1. Now, for example, h6 is a bit too slow after bishop f4. White seems to be better. Bishop e7 is playable, but still engines are quite happy with white in this position. Now already playing bishop takes g5, because I guess in case of g6, queen h6 probably is becoming already really dangerous. So bishop takes g5, and same story. Black has some issues with his king in the center, and even though maybe it's defendable, but it's very dangerous position for black. That's why the main move is d5. Now knight takes e5. Again, knight g5 has to be checked, but main line is knight takes e5. In case of bishop d6, white can try to play f4 and has a very nice kind of initiative. Because black will probably sooner than later castle short, and then he can really get under attack. Knight on e5 is quite strong. So that's why knight takes e5 is the main move. Rook takes e5, bishop d6, rook h5. And of course, black just needs finish his development, and he will be fine. But it's not so easy to manage, because after g6, white has a very annoying bishop b5 check. Because actually bishop c6 simply losing after queen f3, white is just winning according to engine. That's why you need to move your king to the center, king e7, rook h3, and let's say h5, c4. In fact, as dangerous as it looks, maybe the position is holdable for black. At least engines do not give a big advantage to white, but not not to everyone's taste, to play like this with a king on the center. So b6 is quite a dangerous system, and in any case, you definitely need to make quite some work if you want to play it. d6 is more solid, but still this position after bishop c4, bishop e7, castle, castle, queen e2, it's not so easy to equalize with black. Still here, even though of course you will not, for sure will not get a too bad position here, but white has chances for advantage here, in my opinion. For example, lately bishop d7 became quite popular, just trying to develop bishop on c6 and then knight d7 makes some sense because the bishop on c8 is quite passive. Still, I can show this option for white. For example, playing knight c3, takes, bishop c6, logical. Now, in case of bishop f4, strangely enough, after queen c7, it looks a bit dangerous, but according to engines, black can equalize. But maybe white can still be a bit better, just playing more positionally. E takes d6, bishop takes d6, and knight e5, just trying to take two bishops. Bishop e5, queen e5, knight d7, queen g3, and it's quite typical type of position. White has some initiative. Has two bishops. Hard to say. Black is close to equalize, but not like 100% sure that he fully manages to equalize. But maybe at least bishop d7 is a serious option, because of course most logical is knight c6. And now again there are some tries. White sometimes is trying to play knight c3. Little bit strange, creating a weakness, but just trying to play for attack. Bishop d3, b6, rook e1, then queen e4, queen g4. Quite a big theory here. It seems that black is holding probably, but it's also a very interesting option for white. I think the main move is rook d1, and now actually black can simply try to take the bishop, to exchange it for the knight by playing knight a5, but I'm not sure it's so easy to equalize. First of all, even this type of position, taking on d5, bishop f4, then exchanging on d6, and the white square bishop on e6 is a bit limited, so I believe even if computer says it's just equal, still it's a bit more comfortable to play with white, but not much. But actually simply giving up this bishop for the knight, playing bishop d3, knight b4, that is the idea. And knight c3, it's not so easy. Knight takes d3, rook takes d3, not easy to equalize because white has a quite dangerous, serious prospects on the king side. For example, if b6, threatening bishop a6, white can play b4, knight c6, a3, and then bishop f4, let's say d5, because sometimes white can also get d5, bishop f4, and I don't like this position for black. Very, very dangerous in my opinion. Some attack might start soon. So knight a5 I wouldn't recommend. Main move is queen c7 in this position, and let's say white plays bishop d2, sometimes trying to go knight c3, rook d8, and there are different moves in this position. All in all, black is very close to equalize, I must admit, but no guarantee. It's definitely playable for white, and life is not so easy for black here. So actually, after already c3, e6, c3, knight f6 is not as good, as second c3, knight f6. Therefore, after c3, quite many players are playing d5 here. Now, the point is that white cannot really manage to get to this French defense if he is playing it French with 35, because after e5, knight c6, d4 would just transpose to French, but black has d4. It's very, very important resource that after d4, black is doing perfectly fine. Therefore, white should probably take on d5. And now, black can transpose to this system, which we considered in detail in the lessons, in the lesson about second c3. So the move order was like this. I just remind you, you can check it in one of the lessons of this course. So c3 d5, e d5, queen d5, let's say knight f3, knight f6, d4 e6. Yeah, so we considered this variation. It was, well, not so harmless also for black, not so easy to equalize. So this black can have, of course, after d5, ed, queen takes d5, but again, white still has chances for some advantage. But e takes d5, it's d4, it's probably okay. I will give you a certain summary on this position. But again, well, white keeps maybe a very, very minimal, but still a certain small plus white keeps in this position. There are two ways of playing. White is knight f1 is knight f6, trying after bishop b5 check to play bishop d7 to change the bishop. Again, this position is, yeah, maybe it's the most solid for black in this system because you can probably get it. And it is, well, white's advantage is really minimal, but still it's, you know, it's not 100% equal. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's almost equal, but a bit more comfortable for white. Bishop e3, I believe, is the way of playing. Knight d4, knight f5 looks active, but in fact, knight e6, yeah, it's computer, it doesn't approve it really. At least he thinks that knight is not doing that much on f5, and exchanging the bishop on e7 is also not enough to get any real advantage for white. So probably bishop e3 is a better way of playing. And now it's a typical position. Something like this is going on. Queen c2, knight d2. Very typical plan for black is to push his pawns, b5, a5. Maybe white can play knight b3, knight e6, knight d4. Okay, this is very, very close to equal. I mean, it's extremely solid with black for black, and if you are not afraid of playing with isolated pawn, I think I can really recommend it. White's advantage is well, almost, you know, it's kind of disappearing. White has a small plus. With accurate play, black shouldn't have any real problems, but still, again, it's a little bit passive and it's fighting for a draw here. But frankly, with huge chances to achieve it. Another way of playing is knight c6. Then we get to these positions which are actually, yeah, takes, knight bd2. This is a classical knight d2, c5, ed5, ed5. Classical position of this French defense. There is a lot of theory here. Again, the same story. Black is very close to equalize, but I cannot say that he has a very clear, direct way, you know, to sterilize the game. So white keeps a very, very small plus in this position. There were a lot of, I can recommend you games of Karpov. He was playing it very well. He played quite a lot with Viktor Korchnoi. In the games, this position, Victor was trying to equalize, but I remember then even in his book later he wrote that he was not totally happy. He always felt that he was a little worse, and Karpov was very good playing these positions. So again, matter of taste, but it's definitely playable for both sides. I mean, for white, if you feel like you are happy with this tiny advantage in a positional game. For black, when you believe that it's, well, you have a solid position, active pieces, and the only small minus is the isolated pawn, so you are not too worried about it. It's also a point of view and perfectly playable. So now black plays bishop d6 sometimes. Usually white plays bishop d3, h6, h3, just trying to stop bishop g4, and there is big theory still goes on. Or another way of playing is bishop b6, and then rook e1, bishop g4, let's say h3, bishop h5, and white is trying quite often then to exchange this bishop with bishop e3. Yeah, it's not clear if white can count on anything special, but still black has to play some accurate moves to manage to equalize fully. So that is the situation of the sidelines after e6, knight f3, e6. Quite a big number of playable sidelines for white. Again, not too dangerous if you know how to play it as black, but I would definitely recommend all of you who is playing Sicilian with white to have one or two, especially c3, but maybe then b3 or g3 also in your repertoire, and to play it from time to time, because to check if your opponent is well prepared, because not everybody unfortunately is going to buy this course, but you did if you are listening to this, so you might have an advantage and get a better position out of the opening. And from the black side, it's sidelines are serious after e6, but as I've shown you, after listening to this lesson, you will not experience too many problems playing it with black either.